Hi, everyone, and welcome to season 4 of Credible Live, which is crazy. I'm so excited to be kicking off this season. We have a great group of people that are going to be our guests. Today, we have Kerry Hughes on our show today. She's the leader and she's leader of Ethno Farm and EBI Network. We're so excited to speak with Kerry today. And of course, we have Brian Fitzpatrick, CEO of Credible.
Great to be back. So I'm looking forward to this season 4. And this is such a great way to kick it off because today we're really going to go from the soil to the shelf, from ancient plant wisdom to modern innovation, right? So our guest today has spent her career at that intersection of, let's say, nature, science, and commerce. So she's an ethnobotanist, herbalist, author of the founder of Ethno Farm, as Faith had said. And what she's going to do today is really help bring some of the most what's really going on in the wellness world and the beverage products that are coming to market and things that we've all been reading about. So, Kerry Hughes, welcome to the Credible Live broadcast. Great to have you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Faith. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, it's awesome to have you. So we love having people really on the show that who've actually been out there doing this great work, and not just the research, right? But the real, what I would call the real world supply chain, getting your hands dirty, if you will. And that's exactly what you've done. So I really want to get right into that. So, but before we talk about sort of um, these solutions and things that are going on, and because you have a lot of them, I want to really talk about what's the problem, honestly. And I want to do that by asking a question that I've sort of been sitting with is, when we look at all of this, is the consumer problem, is the problem coming from the consumer education side of this, or is it a manufacturing problem, supply chain? Because I think the instinct is to say that the consumers need to demand better from sort of the supply chain, but you can't demand what you can't see. So where does the breakdown actually start? So on the manufacturing or the sourcing side, or is it on the consumer awareness side? And which one has to sort of move first before we see real change?
Well, I really do think it's both. But, I think our industry has changed a lot, in the decades, really since the passage of DSHEA. So, back then, companies were, it was all very small, mom and pop companies. We still have a lot of really small companies, but it was more likely that these owners of the companies were really invested and caring about, the herbs and, what this, industry kind of represents, and often had ties to the source, really. And so there was kind of it was more trustworthy in that way, because there just really was more inherent, you had to kind of really believe in it back then because it was so new, and when we really fought so hard to get this industry established. And so those were the true believers, right? And then as this industry has grown, there's, more money to be made, and there's more investors, and there's really people who have, entered the industry that don't have that connection. And not to say that they're bad people. I mean, there are some bad actors too, and that is an issue. But I think that we've lost, naturally that connection. Supply chains can get really complex. There's sometimes many changes of hands. I was working, as we'll talk, I think, in a little while, about maybe certifications. We saw bananas that changed hands 5 times. I mean, that's kind of a crazy thing, banana. And so, I think when that happens and there's that many changes of hands, and there's the market is so far from the beginning where something comes from, there is a loss of visibility and transparency to what, where something comes from. And, I think that's why we need transparency and certifications and systems where we can, a consumer can, gain that trust. And the consumers today are actually very used to having everything at their fingertips,
Yes.
right? The
Yes.
younger generations, they want to look up things and they want to see. And so, I'm an undying optimist. I'll say that right now. And I do believe we're at a time where not only is it, an important time to really put those systems in place, but I think they will be rewarded because that will be basically market entry. The consumers are wanting it, they're checking up on it, and those brands that invest into transparent supply chains will win out in the future.
Yeah, the ethics of all of this matter. So I want to kind of start back at the beginning a little bit because I think a lot of the audience has heard the word ethnobotany, but I'm not sure many people could really define it well if pressed. So give us the real definition, not the textbook version, but what is ethnobotany and why does it matter right as particularly now in 2026 as we're seeing this big explosion in the wellness industry. I mean this is a huge and rapidly growing industry.
hmm Well, actually, yes, I can imagine I get asked this question quite often
I'm sure.
because I'm usually the first ethnobotanist that most people have ever met. And it's a simple definition. It's really the relationship between humans and plants. It's the science of the relationship between the humans and plants. And if you think about it, we depend on plants for so much, right? You can, obviously food on our plates, those are plants, often, hopefully. Um, and then there's shelter, the places we live, there's wood, the clothing we wear, and then, medicines. And, we've come from a very reductionistic time of using plants and getting great gain and solving a lot of problems with kind of reductionistic science through pharmaceutical development. And depending on who you listen to, our modern pharmaceuticals, about 1/3 to a half of them are inspired by or derived from natural molecules from natural products such as plants or microbes. And so, we wouldn't have that innovation. We wouldn't have those solutions if it wasn't for the biodiversity that they came from. Now we're coming into a time where science is changing and we are moving away from, reductionism is great and we all depend on it and it's very important still. But we're also starting to realize that, hey, we can actually use the systems thinking, different kind of scientific models, complexity theory, in order to understand and solve problems that we have, because our problems are very complex. And I've learned recently a little bit about complexity theory, and I really love this idea that they teach, which is when you have complex problems, you need complex solutions. And so this is, going beyond the silver bullet, which is like one molecule, one target, one solution. We today are, we've gone past, those reductionist things. Most of the pharmaceuticals, we've really done a great job in combating kind of infectious disease, right? Through that kind of science. But now if you look at what we're suffering from, it's really mostly chronic disease. And so, it's all those Western diseases, the arthritis, the, syndrome, metabolic syndrome. And those are multifaceted as far as the things that are contributing to it. And here's a cool thing. So, that sharp rise in chronic disease, actually, if you overlay it, has been accompanied by a sharp loss in the biodiversity in our food. So in that same time, the biodiversity in our food supply has gone down about 75%. So it's really incredible. Right now, about 50% of our calories are coming from only 3 plants.
Wow.
3 plants, 50% of our calories.
Seriously.
Yeah.
So
So And well, go ahead. You have a question?
No, but I mean, first of all, what you're talking about is fascinating because it challenges the assumption that new doesn't necessarily mean better. We've been creating all this new stuff and new technology and new science for food additives and all of this, but the indigenous and ancestral communities, I mean, they were sophisticated pharmacologists long before modern science ever got involved. So, I mean, can you walk us through kind of a specific example of this when you talk about sort of these, everything comes from these three plants and how a plant or a formulation sort of has evolved, and how have we gotten to the point where all of that goodness is actually going backwards because of all this new technology and new science where it's not helping us, it's hurting us.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to reframe that I think science is great. And I think we
Well,
really
I
should
do
believe in
too, but
science. And I think that there's a place for reductionistic thinking. But here's the crazy thing. Okay, so um, if you look at, so there's those three plants that are 50% of our calories are coming from. So this is like rice and wheat and corn are those three
Mhm.
plants. Now, if you look at the ancestor to modern corn, it had about 30% protein and about 3% sugar. And then compare that to today's super sweet varietals, which are 35% sugar and 3% protein. So we have undergone a complete reversal in nutrition. And it's not just those things, it's fiber, it's other complex molecules in the plant that our bodies are evolved with which we could talk about evolution in a minute. But so it's the complete reversal in nutrition. We've taken a whole food and made it essentially into a candy. And then on top of that, we have ultra processed them and purified them to a degree where our bodies are just not used to this. We've only been around as modern humans about 300,000 years, whereas photosynthesis started like 4 billion years ago. Plants have been here making this place a good place for us to live for billions of years. And when we came on the scene, not only was our atmosphere kind of made for us, but also the things that we depend on, the plants, are mirrored in our biology. And our biology relied on these compounds in plants, and still to today rely on these plants to be healthy. And so we have kind of they are our pharmacopoeia. And I think that we just, reductionism came about because we were trying to understand the modern world, or I mean the natural world, and that's where we went. But now, it's really clear we don't still really understand, the natural world, and so we need different kind of scientific models to do that. And our industry is a great example of that because, for a long time, we've all those believers of us that believe in herbal medicine and see it work. We say, well, it's not just one compound, it's not just one thing. It's usually this synergy or some, thing that's happening of multiple bioactives in a plant. And that's a really hard thing to explain in a really scientific way, right? And but we're getting there now with not only kind of these systems thought, but also with machine learning. We are getting to the point where we really can design scientific models in order to understand how these are working. And it's happening out there in the industry. And we're understanding plants in a whole new way that's going to, create a lot of innovation that will solve these problems that we're having.
And listen, I love science and technology myself. Obviously, I've made a career of it. But what I'm curious about, though, so what does really true, respectful, responsible ethnobotanical research actually look like in practice? And because it does sort of bump up against the science a little bit, like
Mhm.
between, I'm going to say, the convergence of marketing and science, sort of, is why we've seen a lot of these sugary reversals, right? And sort of dumbing down our food in a way. Because to me, it's like have those scientific approaches been very active in our food sources? Yes, but now we're talking about this ethnobotanical research and how that bridges the gap. So what does it actually look like in practice, and how can it help us in this modern driven society where we've sort of reversed some of the original health benefits of these foods?
I like to think it's not the science that's the problem. It's actually the business.
The
Business is
marketing.
it's about marketing and business models. So, one thing that comes up with ethnobotany and ethical, product development, and something that we absolutely do not talk enough about in this industry, it's actually a real conversation stopper, is something that happened actually before DSHEA. There was the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. And this was a United Nations conference, and many nations around the world got together and ratified this approach where, if a company was going to come across, and develop a plant for the market, they should do benefit sharing and reciprocity to not only any traditional knowledge holders, but also, to the, source area that those come from, the countries, basically. And of course, we never ratified it here in the US. And this has evolved. I mean, so this was an ideal, and it was like, agreed on. I don't know if you remember, actually, back then, biodiversity was actually a main concern among people. This was an environmental concern that a lot of people believed in and were really kind of passionate about. And then all of a sudden, it got kind of swamped out, maybe rightly so, by climate change, right? But, I feel that biodiversity, first of all, if you solve one of these problems, you'll solve many of the problems. So solving biodiversity problem, which we're on the brink of the sixth mass extinction, essentially. We're seeing extinction levels that we haven't seen since the age of the dinosaurs, and right now. And this is the foundation for our industry. This is the foundation, not only of like, oh, feel good, this is a nice thing that your things come from here, but this is the foundation economically for us as well. This is the foundation for solving problems. It's the foundation for innovation and product development for all of us. And it really should be something that we all believe in, and we all are feeling is a shared responsibility in our industry.
And you've actually, so you've gone beyond the research, right? Because you're not just a researcher. You've actually taken plants from discovery all the way to award-winning products that exist on shelves. So, I mean, that's a kind of a rare combination of scientific rigor and commercial execution of these things, right? Which is really cool. I mean, that's what I love about what I do, is I get deeply involved in the tech and the research of the tech, even involved in, the what's going on behind the scenes to it, bringing it to life and that commercial execution. But in your journey, what does that look like? I mean, from identifying sort of a promising plant to and a compound to it actually showing up on the shelves.
Yeah. So one of the big kind of purposes that drive me is, so as I told you, biodiversity, we're losing it at a very large rate. And I feel very passionate about that we need to actually find and promote value in biodiversity. You see me posting on LinkedIn. That's why. It's because I feel that without us understanding what the value is in biodiversity, we will not save it, because people don't save what they don't value, right? And a lot of times, we look at these plants out in the rainforest and we go, what's the market use of that? It doesn't have any science behind it, or it doesn't, like la 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 la. And or people just don't think that it's useful at all. Maybe it has no market value. But as an ethnobotanist, I look at these things and go, oh my gosh, there's so many low-hanging fruits, first of all. And then there's so much beyond that that is available to us if we would just open our eyes a little bit to that. And, I guess more to your question, early on in my career, I've always been focused on this problem is, how do I, bring new plants to market, basically. And because we need it, because we need to put value into biodiversity and we need to do it ethically. And so early on, I was fortunate that I got to work on a number of kind of more public and private kind of sector projects. So the United Nations, USAID. There was a time when there was like politically more this thought that, well, a lot of these countries kind of saw this up and coming natural products area. And they said, well, wait a minute, we have a lot of biodiversity and we have a lot of poor people. How do we get in on this, natural products industry? And so that's where, an ethnobotanist comes in. And, I was basically hired to help countries to understand how to spend their resources in the wisest way in order to get to the market and to take advantage of that biodiversity and get to those markets. And, what did the market expect? And, what was the best kind of spend for getting things to market quicker, basically.
So that's sort of the macro side of you're really starting at the top of the food chain, if you will, there of getting things right from sort of the sourcing and the how do we preserve this. So the work with USAID and governments, I mean, obviously very, very important. And by the way, whether you talk about climate change, this is a little different because this is right at our doorstep. This is happening right now, and we're seeing this as a big issue. But you've also worked on the execution of that on the commercial side, right? As far as with the individual products. And you talk a little bit about that, of how you've bridged that macro gap to then working on the micro gap of bringing these products to life.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'd like to talk about most right now, that I'm doing that in a very targeted way, is that, what's also bothered me is that the way that things have come to market, like all the plants that we see in this industry store shelves, they got there really through pretty haphazard means. Like, there was like some research, like there was a traditional knowledge, maybe a traditional use, then maybe some researcher did a little bit of science, and then maybe like there was a little local market. And I mean, things just like the stars kind of had to align in order to get this thing to market and to get it to export markets often. And so what I'm really been focused on lately through my EBI network is we're coming up with something that really is a new model for this. It's a real collaborative approach to bring new plants and plant products to market. And I'm really focusing on high positive impact suppliers, oftentimes that I've known for decades through that kind of projects where I was out in the field, with the United Nations or a USAID, whatnot. And so I know these suppliers, and I've seen the production, and I believe that that it's I know that they're doing a good job, kind of thing. And then getting them connected with market partners, and then also doing some of the other steps where we can do branded ingredient development as well.
So you're really
collaboratively.
So what you're saying is you've got to start filling the top of the funnel of the supply chain with the right plants, with the right sourcing and supply, because that'll start filtering down into these products. And you said that's where your priority is right now, right?
Well, so it's two things. So, there are many ingredients out there already that are better ingredients. They're more impactful. Of course, we've known about organic agriculture for a long time. That sometimes isn't possible for all the herbal extracts, but there's fair trade, and regenerative now is on the scene, which is super exciting because it's actually regenerating. We are at a point where we can't just talk about sustainability anymore. We need to regenerate, right? Because lands are really degraded. And then, so those ingredients, there's a number of options already existing on the market, and good certifications, third-party certifications that prove that that's true. And often I will tell brands, hey, why not just choose one? You don't have to do your whole, formulation with these ingredients. It might be too expensive, but just choose one. They're really good stories. Some of these ingredients, Fair Wild is a great certification too. Certified Regenerative. These ingredients have great stories, and they have great traceability, and can really be something that marketing can hang their hats on,
Mhm.
and consumers can be assured with, and then they can even look them up. Often it's very transparent. So that's one easy way in. But what I'm doing is a little more behind the scenes in the bringing the newer, things, and all the pieces together of things that maybe have not been really on the market before.
So in having said that, and that's what you're focused on, I mean, what does a truly ethical regenerative supply chain actually look like in practice? Not in theory, but in actual practice, because you said certain things have to be true. So what has to be true at every stage of that chain for the word sustainable to actually mean anything?
Well, sustainables, that's kind of a loaded word because it really doesn't have a real good definition. But I would say let's bring it back to maybe like regenerative,
Mhm.
um, which I think is more interesting, anyways, and it's
Okay,
something that
that's the key word. So
consumers are really
what
looking at.
has
Yeah.
for that regenerative word to actually mean
Okay.
something, what has to be true in the chain?
Yeah. Okay. So there's different approaches out there to, what is regenerative production. First of all, I'll say that, that it's exciting because there are farmers out there that have started doing this, not because they want a certification or whatever. They're just doing it because it's better farming. It's fewer inputs, it's less work, and often more profit. And this has been shown to be true. Um, and so there's that level out there. But because we have the market we do, and I really do feel strongly that if somebody's making those kind of claims on the mass market, that this is a regenerative product, then there's got to be some assurance. There's got to be some trust provider that's showing that's true. And then, so there has been a few labels out there that are regenerative labels, certifications that have been emerging. And, I like to liken it like the early days of organic. It might be uncomfortable for us in the industry or for consumers because there are many labels and there are many approaches, but it's also a time of high integrity because there's many different, well-meaning people trying to solve the same problem and coming at it in different ways. And those approaches that show the best promise are going to rise to the top, right? And that's already happening. So if for instance, you look at Whole Foods Market has done a good job actually, and then they've done this for fair trade too, and I was involved with that as well, where they said, okay, we know that there's this, call out of fair trade or regenerative. What does that mean? And we want to have that in our market. So what they did is they go through a really intensive kind of qualification process for what labels they'll accept under those kind of claims. So, as regenerative under Whole Foods Market, then it's ROC and it's certified regenerative, and a couple others now. And so, there's kind of these market gates, is what I would call it, that are showing that, okay, this is true. And I'd say, if you're seeing regenerative claims on things that, don't have a third party verification, I'd be very wary because, greenwashing is very possible and it's out there. And our industry does suffer from it. And when we're talking mass market, I think that it's really important that a third party certifier, especially a nonprofit is my preference, goes out there and certifies that this is actually true, these claims.
So what should consumers be looking for as it relates to these certifications? Because what makes a certification rigorous enough to be meaningful and realistic
Mhm.
is consumers just don't understand what that is. And the
Yeah.
certifications are only as strong as their standards. So how do What should consumers be looking for, and how do they tell that it's not a bunch of BS?
Well, I think a nonprofit certifier is a good first start. Also, there is a certification for certifiers. So it's the ISO 17065 certification. And that is not something that they all have. And this is an important thing for knowing that certifiers are going through the right processes to, and have those kind of documentation processes in place internally in order to, do the right job. So I would start there. And then, like I said, there are these market gates that you can look at where those analysis has already been done for them. Like a Whole Foods market. At Expo, I was hearing there's a couple other markets doing that now too, going through kind of a gap analysis of the different approaches and figuring out what are we going to accept.
Yeah, because I've seen in other industries where the bar is so low that you just, it's pay to play and it becomes greenwashing. And then in other industries where there's so much rigor and the standards are so high that only 3 brands can meet them.
Yeah, that's a problem. I mean, I think that is a problem that with the certifications that we're dealing with is that, we don't want to end up with just a bunch of elite certifications for an elite, bunch of people, I mean, that's nice for some people, but we really are at the point where we need to go beyond. And, and that's why I'm involved with the Greener World. And I really do believe strongly in the certified regenerative approach, because we don't need to have organic first. So, I'm an advisor with them, a technical advisor, independent, but, I think that organic's awesome, and we should all, stand up for our organic standard and hold that up as a great example. But I think that when farmers are ready to go regenerative, somebody needs to meet them on that journey and follow them in a rigorous way all the way through. So that's pragmatic and it's rigorous and it's a real journey.
That's very important work. And I think that I'd like to sort of talk a little bit as we start to close out, sort of how can people learn more about this and what should they be looking into, and how can they get in touch with you, like if they're a brand, but even for consumers to better educate themselves?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I post a lot on LinkedIn, so I have a blog and a lot of content going out there. So not only on LinkedIn, but also on my website. So ethnofarm.com. And that's farm with a PH. And so, there's information there. There's good information like a Greener World, that nonprofit that has the certified regenerative standard, also has a free guide to understanding food labels. So I think that's really helpful, because there are a number of claims out there on the market that, especially for animal production, where it's like just really confusing, like cage free. Oh, that sounds so good, but may not be so good in real life, Right. So to really understand what goes behind these kind of claims, and so, getting some education there from nonprofits that are, trust providers essentially is a good thing.
So, but just one last question before we wrap up is, so whether you're a brand or a formulator or investor or a conscious consumer, what do you believe is the single most important mind shift or mindset shift that has to occur to make this become part of the solution, that where biodiversity and this biodiversity centered wellness, which is where starts to become mainstream?
Well, sadly, I think the message has to be kind of a marketing business message, because that's what people want to hear. And you can see there is a lot of data showing that consumers want that, right? So that there is data showing that consumers are looking for, sustainability or regenerative or high welfare kinds of call outs. But there's a lot of confusion about, well, is it worth it to get a certification or whatever? And my story, or what I want to say to people, is that because there is a lot of interest in these products, and because the nature of selling these products is really changing. It's kind of away from the brick and mortar, like one little label on a shelf kind of a thing, to social media and live content and lots of content online and searchable stuff. That the storytelling angle is very important, and these ingredients can carry a really compelling story that can really help the brand. And so storytelling branding, I think, is a really powerful thing for brands and for businesses if they need some reason to justify it, right? Otherwise, just go out in the field and get to know the plants and get to know the producers, and fall in love with it that way.
This has been a fascinating conversation, and I think it's a very important and timely one. And the depth of the knowledge you bring, and with your background, and more importantly, the practical frameworks that you're supporting and that you're helping to build, is exactly what's needed. So starting out at that top and bringing this down into the supply chain is critical. And I love how you shifted the conversation. That look, this is what we need to talk about, because you're absolutely right. As I was thinking about it, if we don't solve that issue from the top of the supply chain, then how does this even work? Right. So, and then from the bottom up is really about the education. It's really about the consumers understanding what they're putting in their body, what to look for, how to interpret sort of and understand these certifications. So this has been fascinating. And if you're for everybody who's watching and tuning in here, if you want to connect to Kerry's work and explore the EBI network, or just learn more about ethnobotanical sourcing, how can folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, I'm hanging out on LinkedIn a lot, so you can find me there. And then also on my website. So I have a blog, like I said, a contact form that you can reach out, and myself or one of my staff will get back to you.
And that is that on your website, or is that all on
Yes.
LinkedIn? Okay.
Yeah, both. I
And
mean, you can, message me on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn, and then also on my website is,
Yeah, and you're pretty active on LinkedIn, because
yes.
I stalked you a bunch before you came on to get to know you. So, and you're always active. So I love
I
that.
am pretty active,
And then
yes.
as you were talking, I'm going like, this should be a mandatory high school course that like
yeah.
every kid, junior or senior, should be taking to understand what this look. I mean, it's so like I want my kids to listen to this episode and just hear what you have to say, because it is incredibly interesting, and it's going to affect the next generations to come significantly. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, one point, do we have a little bit of time that I could add one more point?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
Adding to that next generation and where we should go with this is that, I mentioned about like our relationship with plants and how we've evolved with them. Plants, they used to have a lot more of these kind of medicinal compounds in them, these bitters, right? And in fact, herbalists for a long time would, use these bitters, and we were like, okay, that's kind of cool, but it's kind of weird. I don't know what they're doing. And even our cocktails have bitters and stuff, and that's where that came from, right? Well, about, I don't know, a little over 10 years ago, a little over a decade ago, we discovered that there are bitter sensors that not only live on the tongue where we knew they were, but all the way down the digestive tract. And these bitter sensors play a very, very important role in the whole kind of digestive cascade in metabolism. So it kicks off our metabolism if it detects a bitter compound, which are those medicinal compounds in plants that we've bred out of our food, by the way, for the sweet stuff. Then it helps to balance blood sugar. It makes this whole metabolic cascade that is really building health, and that used to happen all the time when we ate, and now is happening hardly at all. And the other thing, which is crazy, is that it sounds crazy, is that what else is produced by those bitter sensors is GLP-1.
Yeah.
So the GLP-1, those hormones, are produced by the bitter sensors naturally when you have bitter tasting plants, right? So we've taken them all out of our diet, and we have this very poor biodiverse diet with a lot of sweet stuff. And now we're paying pharmaceutical companies to take this hormone to fix our metabolisms that have been
Yeah.
broken.
I mean, that's why Ozempic exists, because people aren't
Yeah.
making it happen the way it should be. But to me, like that, like when I started seeing all this come out on these peptides, I said, okay, like, where does this come from? Like, what's the natural form of these GLP-1s? And it's
Yep.
interesting you mentioned that, because
Yep.
I mean, big pharma obviously makes a lot of money off of these drugs, but I think it's important to understand that source, that original source, and that's fascinating. I never knew what you
Yeah.
just said and where that comes from. That's
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important thing for our industry, I think, because this is really the power of medicinal plants,
it
and
really is.
those are those bitters that the herbalists use. Then that's why they work.
They didn't
And
talk about this stuff in health class at,
exactly,
and the only I remember, in dear Miss Grace, who was my high school biology teacher, she was talking about these things way back in the 80s, and God love her, she's still doing well and alive, and I think it has a lot to do with
she's
she was
eating her
way
bitters.
before her time, the way she was eating. She even, I remember my daughter was eating the other day, she was eating these seaweed things, and, I said, "Boy, I remember when my biology teacher told me about macrobiotics and the stuff that comes from the sea," and we all looked at her like she was nuts.
Yeah, exactly.
So the schools do need to teach this stuff
They
for
really
sure.
do. They really do, and people need to understand, what really the power of good nutrition, like, and it's good nutrition that we're not even really seeing talked about.
Yes.
Nobody's
Oh,
talking about bitters as an approach. They're just talking about high protein or, whatever. But
Carrie,
there's
the only
a
things I
lot
was
you can
aware of
get.
is the ones I put in my Manhattan, or,
Yeah.
so
Well, if you could do without the alcohol, maybe that could be
that's
a
only
help
once in a while. I've so it,
Yeah.
and I have to tell you, amazingly, as I even kicked way back on that, how much better I feel, and, it's truly amazing, and as a guy with the name Brian Fitzpatrick, I sorta grew up in that Scotch culture, so
Uh-huh.
it's
Yeah, well, Kerry Hughes, the Irish in me knows what you're talking about.
there you go. Well, Carrie, a great conversation, and speaking of Faith stalking people, I'm glad she stalked you, and you didn't have to get a restraining order against her.
Talk me
Uh,
anytime.
yeah,
Hey,
absolutely.
not
That's
for
all. So if
everybody.
you wanna stalk Carrie, she's on LinkedIn. That's how you
Yeah,
stalk her.
there's where you could do that. You could do that in
That's where
LinkedIn.
you do that, on LinkedIn, right? And you
Yeah.
do have some great content, you're talking about some really important things there. So I encourage you, folks, to look her up on LinkedIn, and, she's talking about some great things as she did today. So thank you for joining us today. And, Faith, who did you stalk for our next episode?
I know, I'm not gonna live this down now. Our next guest is gonna be, Natasha Brunier. She's the founder and CEO of Cable, which is building trust at scale, how technology, regulation, and leadership are reshaping financial crime prevention. So that'll be really interesting, and she's gonna be on March 27th.
Awesome. So make sure you join us on March 27th. And Carrie, thank you so much. Again, fascinating conversation. And as always, by having people smarter than me in all these areas, I learned so much. So thanks so much for joining us on Credible Live.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. Anytime.